Okay, so I think we'll start. So it's 11:03. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a pretty varied panel of specialists today. So we'll start shortly. So again, thank you for joining us to this Adopt the Cloud, your guide to successful Azure migration webinar. Today, your panelists are, we have Alexandre Lafemme from Sherweb, who's the Microsoft Partner Program and Incentives Manager. We have Rasha Jafar, Product Sales Manager for Azure, also working for Sherweb. On the Microsoft side, we have James Pennington, Cloud Solutions Architect for Microsoft. And we have Charlotte Oikel, Partner Technology Strategist, also for Microsoft. My name is Roman Zmeev. I'm the product marketing manager here at Sherweb for Azure. So without further ado, we're going to jump into this webinar. And if you have any questions throughout, just type them in the chat. We'll pause and we'll make sure to answer your questions. Okay, so Alex, to you.
Okay, and right before we jump in, just to make sure, have you hit the record button?
I'm pretty sure by default it records already.
Okay, so just to let our audience know that this webinar is being recorded. So if you have any colleagues that aren't able to attend right now and watch, it will be available for you afterwards. And as always, we're very happy to have everyone here. So I have the pleasure of introducing Sherweb for once. Maybe my face is a bit familiar for some of you because I've been doing a lot of the webinars for Sherweb on all the changes that have been happening with Microsoft this year. But today, I have some great news for you, especially if, like me, you're a bit tired of seeing my face and hearing my voice. It's going to be a lot of other people talking. So I'm just doing the introduction. And because we've been doing a lot of webinars, a lot of content that we're putting out on social media and all of that, we have to start by saying who is Sherweb, because most of you may be already Sherweb partners. Some of you may have just seen this, on your social media feed because it might be a subject that's interesting to you. So we want to give you just a brief overview of who Sherweb is. So if you want to move to the next slide. So in a nutshell, Sherweb is pretty much the equivalent of a supermarket. So what you would be able to do is to go to all the different providers for cloud solutions and have an account with them, have an invoice, have a relationship with them. Or you could go to all-in-one marketplace where you have all of these different products that are available, all of these different companies that provide these services, but through Sherweb, through the indirect program, so that you have this everything all in one place. You have a single point of contact, a single invoice, a single team to help you with support. So this has been something that's been part of our success, being a cloud provider like this. And if you move to the next slide, like a lot of supermarkets, we didn't stop there. We wanted to evolve, and part of our evolution has been to add extra solutions, extra services for our partners. So it's a lot like a supermarket where now you can have catering services, you can even have conferences, they can host parties there and things like that. So it's a little bit like that. So if you're looking for an extension of your team for NOC services or other types of professional services, a white label help desk, we're there to help you. We even have some hosted solutions if you're trying to set up desktop as a service, or even a new option that we're going to have soon, hosted Veeam solution, which is going to really help as well to give complete solutions to your customers, all from the same provider. And other things that we do, great call, you switched the slide exactly on cue, is that we want to be that extension of your team. So I have a nice little graphic here that shows you in the center of it all. You have direct access to our technical support, the technical account manager, or our billing. But for what you want to do, you have that single point of contact, either an account executive or an account manager, who's going to help you doing all of the onboarding, training, coaching, advising that you need. And whenever their knowledge, their help is not enough, they call upon our extended team of marketing experts, people for sales operation, And part of what we want to showcase today is some of the solution experts that we have and subject matter experts. And we also have called upon our good friends at Microsoft to provide support on this so that we can do a great presentation for people that are thinking about moving to Azure. Because as we know, lots and lots of changes, lots and lots of headwinds are happening right now in the market for different companies across all verticals. In the United States right now, there is a recession, depending on what your definition of a recession is. So customers are very conscious of the costs, and a lot of them, are nearing their hardware refresh right now for on-prem servers and things like that. So as most of you probably are MSPs, want to offer the best solutions to your customers. We wanted to give you an idea, at least, of what an Azure migration would look like. What are some of the benefits? What the process looks like. It is more of a high-level presentation today, but it's really to kind of seed that option for you. And of course, we also want to make sure that it's a financially sound decision for you. So we do have also our product manager that's going to help you understand a bit more of the back-end incentives, the cashbacks that you can get from Microsoft for going this route. So that's going to be it for me today. And I'm going to pass the ball to Rasha.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. So I'm Rasha, the product sales manager for Azure. And of course, you're all wondering, why would you go from pay-as-you-go to the CSP model? If you already know that the CSP model will allow you to transact across Microsoft Cloud Services, the Office 365, the Dynamics, etc., and now Azure as well, through a single platform. It is available for both one-tier and two-tier resellers, and you're going to get the exact same benefits that you get with the pay-as-you-go model in terms of benefits, in terms of support, services, etc. But the idea is that CSP will enable you to own the customer lifecycle and relationship from end to end, to set your own prices depending on the technical and billing support that you're providing to your customers. You set the terms, you directly bill your customers, you directly provision and manage subscriptions, and you also attach your own value-added services by being the first and single point of contact for customer support. Of course, this is only possible for you if you get some discounts. So you're getting some front-end discounts from Microsoft through Sherweb. So your monthly recurrent revenue are discounted compared to the pay-as-you-go. We start at 5%. We can go up depending on the volume, depending on the solution. So there is no one solution that fits all. Now, for the next slide, we're going to be talking about the new partner program. You've all been with Microsoft for a while now. You know that there was the Cloud Competency Program, but this Cloud Competency Program has ended, is ending actually tomorrow, and we're going to have the Designation Program. And as of tomorrow, as of Monday, basically, 3rd of October, the Cloud Competency Program will cease to exist. And for the back incentives, there are some legacy incentives that are going to just still happen until December. But after that, until your renewal date, you cannot have back-end incentives until you get one of the designations. So for this new partner program, we have 3 among 7 designations that are related to Azure. The first one is the infrastructure Azure, and then you have the data and AI, and then you have the data and application innovation. If you have, before October 2022, the Silver Cloud Competency or one of the designations, you are going to be eligible for these back-end incentives, which are on the core Azure services 4%. If you move to Azure reservations, this 4% will become 10%. And on top of it, you're going to have an extra 2% for the workload accelerator, which is the data and application innovation analytics consumption with a 25K cap. The idea is that we are going to have another webinar just because we already have many about the partner program. We're going to have just one for the Azure, the different incentives, whether financial or technical. But we need to tell you that if you do manage to have the cloud competency, or you did manage actually to have the cloud competency before October, then after your renewal, you're going to must have actually the designation in order to have these back-end incentives. So I hope that this helps you, this motivates you to work with us, and we're gonna see you on other webinars just for the incentives. And now back to Roman. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rasha. So I'll pass it on now to our friends at Microsoft. And Charlotte, here you go.
Perfect. Thanks, Roman. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Roman, Rasha, and Alex for that great introduction. My name is Charlotte. I'm a partner technology strategist at Microsoft. My role is to support technical enablement. So I support with training and skilling initiatives and things of that nature, and I'm based in Toronto, Ontario. I'm also joined by my friend James, who is one of our cloud solution architects here at Microsoft as well, and he'll be helping answer some of the questions when we get to that portion, and also helping with some of the questions that come up in the chat. So as Alex mentioned, and I'm just going to make sure I can move this slide there. Perfect, amazing, worked. So as Alex mentioned, our session today will be high level. It will be around some of the basics of Azure migration. So talking about right from digital transformation to cloud adoption, to a basic introduction to Azure, to advantages of cloud adoption, some common migration scenarios, and we'll wrap up with some best practices and some links to resources where you can learn more about that. Perfect. All right, here. Having a little bit of difficulty seeing, there we go, perfect. Okay, so let's start with the basics of digital transformation. Software and technology are really infused in every part of business, making every company a digital company regardless of size. And this is really happening across every industry. Businesses are going through digital transformation to stay competitive in today's world, particularly more so post-pandemic. Okay, perfect. Sorry, just having a little bit of trouble seeing the slide moving along there. With digital transformation, customers are looking to achieve 4 desired outcomes with successful transformation. First, they really want to engage their customers in new and meaningful ways. They also want to transform their products and deliver continuous information and innovation. They really want to empower their employees with the right tools and the right data to make sure that they can collaborate and be productive regardless of where they're working from. And finally, they really want to optimize operations by better anticipating customer demands and supply chain disruptions. So, what is Azure and how can it help with digital transformation, particularly in the SMB space? When I think of Azure, I think of it as, a collection of easy to use integrated infrastructure and platform services in the cloud that can really help businesses of any size build and deploy and manage solutions. Some of Azure's core services include cloud computing, storage backup and recovery, application hosting, development and testing, database services, and identity and access management. I find that Azure services really easily integrate with a business's on-premise infrastructure and applications. Really think of Azure as an on-demand data center for your customers, where they can get all of the IT infrastructure and services that they can't or don't want to manage themselves on-premise. And when we think about Azure, how does Azure fit amongst the competition? Well, this is a study that looks at what cloud is being used in a set of organizations. You can see the currently using, the experimenting, and the plan to use trends across companies all over the world. What we have found is that customers tend to be multi-cloud. From an Azure perspective, though, we're doing really well to further penetrate to all of those companies in really meaningful ways. So effectively, what we're seeing is healthy growth in a crowded, competitive market. And Azure is truly global. With our global infrastructure, which is comprised of 2 key components, physical components and networking components. The physical component is rapidly growing, comprised of about 160 or so physical data centers, which are arranged into about 60 regions, and really linked by one of the largest interconnected networks on the planet. With the connectivity component of the Azure Global Network, the fastest and most resilient network in the public cloud, each of the Azure data centers provides high availability, low latency, scalability, and the latest advancements in cloud infrastructure. So let's think a little bit about the advantages of moving to cloud. When we think of the core benefits, we can really group them into technical benefits and financial benefits. On the technical side of things, we have scalability, of course. So the ability to scale out resources depending on usage, utilization, and demand. On the availability side of things, on-premise, it can be quite costly to build highly available infrastructure and less costly to build out HA and infrastructure in the cloud. Of course, there's security and compliance, which is top of mind. Within the cloud, we're always adding to our security infrastructure and tool sets to keep you on par with what's transpiring with respect to security threats and trends within global networks. And finally, capacity optimization, meaning that you're only paying for the resources that you actually utilize over time. So your capacity can fluctuate depending on those particular demands. And then, of course, there are financial benefits as well. Transforming your overall budget allocation from what has historically been a CapEx to what now is an OpEx pricing model. Reduce data center footprint. Those amortized facilities or colo agreements that you might have in place, those are no longer needed. And of course, there's staff productivity and staff development. Your technical staff can focus on exciting DevOps projects, focus on automating tasks that traditionally might be manual. They can work on automation of deprovisioning and provisioning workloads more dynamically, rather than things like stacking and racking servers or dealing with HVAC or heating and cooling type of issues. And then finally, from a sustainability perspective, data centers that are hosted with cloud services, such as the ones with Azure, we do so at such scale that we really benefit from the overall sustainability and the least amount of environmental impact. So we've talked a little bit about the why of cloud adoption and why Azure, but a lot of times I find, particularly in our channel, that there's questions around the opportunity within the SMB market. So, our channel typically serves that space, and sometimes folks are wondering, what's in it for me? What's the partner opportunity for me? So what we found through a recent study was that about 50% of SMB customers have some plans to move to cloud in the next 12 months. In addition to that, small and mid-sized markets really account for about 70% of the worldwide cloud migration service market spending. So we're really seeing clear momentum and opportunity for partners in our space to engage with customers in the SMB channel. And, the opportunity doesn't end at migration. Of course, there's a lot of opportunity to attach your services to migration projects, but really that migration project is a gateway to higher revenue services. It doesn't end at first sale, but as you build your relationship and become a trusted advisor to your customers, you have opportunities to attach services to future projects. It really doesn't end at that first migration. And when we think about, what common scenarios do we see in our channel, there are a number of migration scenarios when it comes to moving to Azure. But what we found particularly in our SMB space, that the most common ones really center around migrating on-prem Windows Server or SQL Server or other types of databases, and web apps as well. So those are the most common scenarios that we see in our channel. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about adopting cloud and the cloud adoption framework. Really, before beginning your migration, it's really important to ensure that your strategy is in place, your plans are in place, and your readiness is done. What we found is that building a business case for migration and doing the proper planning really ensures you have the business readiness to migrate. And then once you're ready to migrate, Microsoft has first-party tooling to really help you assess the technical feasibility and readiness for migration, can help you prepare your workloads, and then finally migrate those workloads both quickly and securely, all the while sort of maintaining your governance and your day-to-day management operations. Okay, perfect. And there are a number of tools and templates available to you here. I know there's a lot on this slide. You'll get a copy of these links afterwards to make sure you can refer to them. But I'd really encourage you to check out a lot of these tools. There are many templates, frameworks, guides to help you plan and track your migration before, during, and after. And I'd really encourage you to check out some of these links. So now let's talk a little bit more about the Azure Migrate tool itself. Okay. So what's driving migrations to Azure? So we talked a little bit about, the why of adopting cloud, but what we found is that there's, some traditional triggers where customers will start to think about migrating to cloud. And we find that those are typically grouped into two kinds of drivers, infrastructure and application. On the infrastructure side of things, we find that things like data center contract expiry, hardware refresh cycles, software end of support, capacity needs. Those are some of the things that we see drive the migration needs to Azure. And on the application side of things, we see things like security threats that have come up, or compliance needs, or customers want to innovate on their applications, and cloud can unlock a lot of that innovation capability for them. These are primarily what we see driving migrations to Azure. And the Azure Migrate tool really has a broad selection of tools. There are over 12 migration tools, which allow you to assess 35,000 servers at once. Now, I know that's probably way more than we would see in our SMB space, but it's good to know that that option is there. And of course, this Azure Migrate tool does allow you to migrate to our global regions. Think of Azure Migrate as really a central hub for data center migration. It supports multiple scenarios, like what we talked about earlier, from Windows to Linux to SQL servers and more. It offers diverse capabilities ranging from discovery to the actual migration itself. And it really provides comprehensive visibility through a centralized migration repository. Now, let's hop into each of those in a little bit more detail. So as we talked about, Azure supports a variety of migration scenarios: Windows and Linux server, SQL, as well as non-SQL type databases. Virtual desktop is a lot of a common scenario that we see in our space as well. Things like VMware, Hyper-V, as well as supporting the migration of on-premise infrastructure or AWS or GCP infrastructure as well. In terms of capabilities, Azure Migrate really has comprehensive capabilities that allow you to discover machines in your environment using either agent-based or agentless appliances or CSV upload methods. You can use assessment features, including readiness, cost estimation, performance sizing, app dependency modeling, and so on. You can auto-populate your migration projects using that assessment data. And you can use agent-based or agentless migration with near zero downtime. And then we think about the extensibility of Azure Migrate. There's quite an extensive list of first-party and ISV tooling partner tools that can be used to support your specific business objectives. You'll see a number of them on this slide here, really ranging from discovery to assessment to the actual migration itself.
Charlotte, we have a question in the chat.
Sure.
So I'll just read out the question. It says, can Azure Migrate or another tool forecast expenditures for on-premise servers that were interested in migrating to Azure?
Yeah, and I'll ask James to chime in here too. In my experience, so there are cost estimation tools, but another tool that we do have available, which we're not covering today, but we can certainly follow up with and send some resources on, is our Azure cost calculator, which can help provide even the total cost of ownership. So it can kind of give you a comparison of what you're spending today and what you might spend in Azure, and also give you some perspective of when you can anticipate return on investment. And I'll just open it up to James to see if he has anything to add there too.
Yeah, so definitely the Migrate tool, and thanks, Charlotte, this has been great so far, but it definitely gives you, there's a few options you can modify when you get the data uploaded from your current environment in there. And there's a whole scope of different things. You can bring in offers and discounts and stuff you're applied to. You can also look at hybrid use benefits. You can look at, do I want to do an as-is migration of my servers or my workloads, or do I want to do a optimization? If you do an optimization, something like a CSV isn't as easy to do as an import, then you really have to do the agent or agentless based to gather all those metrics and data and let that tool consume all of that data set over a reasonable a period of time. Usually we recommend a week to 2 weeks. Then once you do that and all of that information and data points is in there, you can select a few options. There's some knobs to turn and such, but you can basically look at what the cost estimate is going to be, and it breaks it all down for you as well too. It says, your workload is currently running 8 vCPUs, 8 gigs of memory, you've got this much storage, there's this many IOs running, lots of data points, and it'll say, when you bring this workload into Azure, this virtual machine can actually run on this series with this type of virtual machine, and it's going to cost you this much per month on a pay-as-you-go, or if you go with reserved instance, you can bring down the cost by this much, and that's how much it's going to cost. So that's a lot of information in one very long run-on sentence, but the answer is yes, there's a lot of that information within the tool set, and it's very easy and intuitive to use, even before you bring those workloads into Azure and even start incurring any costs.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, James. So we have another question that came in, so very happy with the interaction. Keep them coming. The question is as follows. One thing I always find difficult is the designation of VMs. Example, E4, E4S, E4D, E4DS, E4B, E4BS, E4BDS. Very confusing. How can we easily discern these?
So it's another great question, and there's always new ones coming out every day. So expect I don't want to say confusion to continue, but expect the breadth and depth of the different offerings to continue. Now, the reason for that is there's specific things. So for example, an S allows attaching premium storage, for example, whereas a non-S doesn't. There's different features and functionalities. My recommendation there, and perhaps I'll share the link with you, Roman, in our chat, and you can reshare it in the overall chat. But there's a landing page in the Azure Docs that basically covers at a very high level what the different series intended uses are for. And when you drill in even just one single page, you'll get more of a detailed breakdown on, for example, why you would use a DS or why you would use an S. There's all different underlying differences between those virtual machine series and sub-series, and why you would potentially select one over the other. As far as the migration tool is concerned, it will actually look at some of these factors that I'm talking about and suggest the correct series and sub-series based on those metrics and values. In some cases, you might get an option. You might say this or this, as opposed to just one specific one, because you might be on a cusp of a decision between one point or the other. So I'll share that link with you, Roman, and you can reshare it in the chat. But that's just sort of my take on it. Expect, like I said, that's ever changing, and it will continue to grow, expand, and morph as different offerings are retired and brought into the landscape.
Thank you, James. So the link will be shared in the chat for everyone to see. Back to you, Charlotte.
Perfect. Thanks, Roman. Thanks, James. So just sort of wrapping up with a few more things, we want to talk about some of the key migration phases. We've touched on those a little bit, and then also some of the resources and some best practice considerations as well. So when we think about the migration phases with Azure Migrate, we've got discover, assess, and finally the migrate phase itself. Using Azure Migrate, we've provided here some key examples of the key steps for some of those common migration scenarios that we've talked about. Taking just one, for example, the database migration scenario. In the discover phase, we would add the Azure Migrate database assessment tool to an Azure Migrate project. We download and launch the data migration assistant, and we then upload those results to Azure Migrate. In the assess phase, we would view the assessment groupings and data from the DMA tool and in the Azure Migrate dashboard. And then we'd gain recommendations on performance, reliability improvements for our target Azure location. And then finally, in the migrate phase itself, we would follow the instructions that we were given in the Azure Migrate database migration tool to launch the data migration service. That would help us move schema, move data, as well as uncontained objects from the source server to the target server. Now let's talk a little bit about some key resources that you have available to you. Perfect. There are a lot of links on this slide, and we'll make sure to get these shared out with you, but I would really encourage you to check out these resources. As James mentioned, a lot of these resources and features and capabilities are being updated on an ongoing basis. So I would really encourage you to go back to these resources from time to time versus sort of referring to some of those point in time decks. So as much as we'll share this deck out, we do like to make sure that people are using the links that we share as well, just to make sure that you're getting the latest and greatest information. So please do check out some of these links. And then I did want to sort of touch on a little bit about some of the best practice considerations for Azure Migrate. This is just a high level list of some of the considerations that we've seen. It's certainly not an exhaustive list of all the possible best practices, but the ones that sort of most commonly that I have seen in our space. First being really start with that Azure migration guide, and we'll have some links around these best practices as well. Start with that migration guide in the cloud adoption framework if you're interested in migrating to Azure. This guide really walks you through a set of tools and basic approaches, pardon me, to migrating to the cloud. It gives you guides, checklists to follow that really can help you outline potential areas of complexity that have the potential to add scope to your migration project. Another thing to consider is whether your customer's business operates in multiple geographic regions that have the potential to have disparate data sovereignty requirements. So really make sure to review the distribution of assets thoughtfully and make sure that the appropriate teams are engaged to provide input from a compliance perspective. VMware migration. So migrating VMware hosts can really accelerate the overall migration process itself. Each migrated VMware host can move multiple workloads to the cloud. And after migration, those VMs and workloads can either stay in VMware or they can be migrated to more modern cloud capabilities. Similarly, with migrating instances of SQL, migrating instances of SQL can also accelerate your overall migration project. Each migrated instance can move multiple databases, multiple services, really potentially accelerating the migration of multiple workloads. Migrating multiple data centers, of course, will add significant complexity to the project. During the process of the move, there are really extra considerations that should be considered and thought about. So really when you're the key here, the key theme that you'll see through all these best practices is really planning in advance and involving the appropriate teams. Another thing that we commonly see is that companies and customers want to move to cloud because they have constraints in their on-premise infrastructure with capacity, speed, or stability. They're no longer getting satisfactory performance of their existing data centers or on-premise infrastructure. Those same constraints should make sure that they're thought about and planned and really require more planning in the assessment and migration phases of your project. And then finally, from a governance perspective, of course, we touched on it a little bit when we talked about customers that might have different data sovereignty requirements, but it's also really important to think about those teams as they're vital to the success of a migration project. So really encourage customers to bring in those governance privacy teams and make sure that they're closely aligned with the IT and cloud adoption teams so that they're all on the same page in terms of what the plan might be. And as I mentioned, we'll also make sure that these links to some of these best practices are included in follow-up to today's presentation as well. All right. And with that, we'll open up to the entire team and see if there are any more questions in the chat or other questions that might come up for folks.
Just want to start by saying thank you very much, Charlotte, and great job on finding the next slide button with the very dark background.
I was really struggling there. I was thinking to myself, I should have used the white template.
Absolutely. So we'll just give a minute for anyone who has any questions to just type them directly into the chat, and I'll read them out.
In the meantime, if I can say some other comments, because I stay more in the partner center and incentive side of things, so I hadn't revisited the Azure offering in a very long time. And what this presentation, like for me, really kind of awakened is the fact that, Azure has evolved a lot in the last few years, especially the tools to be able to migrate to the cloud. And if there's one lesson that, we have to remember is that it's all about the planning. And it makes sense intuitively because you are moving, to a brand new world, right? From the on-prem all the way to the cloud. So because there's a lot of unknowns and there's, it's a big change, you want to make sure that whenever you're talking to your customers, they are reassured that everything is accounted for. As Charlotte said, like involve all the different teams, anyone, for compliance and security and data governance to be part of that discussion so that whenever you finally hit that migrate button, everyone knows what's going to happen and what the next steps are going to be. And I think that's come a long way from, back in 2016, 2017, where, a lot of us were just kind of winging it to go into the cloud. So I think that's great. And otherwise, I know that a lot of times we say that there's never been a better time than now, but this time we actually really mean it. Post pandemic, you want to strike the iron while it's hot. A lot of companies are facing a lot of different struggles that can be solved directly by having that Azure migration. To have just think of the work from anywhere environments that everyone wants to have, especially on the worker side and employee side. Think of all the different geopolitical events, whether it is, a conflict, somewhere around the world, or just natural disasters. I mean, just recently we've had Fiona up here in Canada, and as we speak, Ian is, still over Florida right now. So if you are on-prem localized and you lose power and you lose, days and days of productivity versus having, we saw all the different regions that Microsoft covers. So, short of a Armageddon type asteroid, you should be okay, with the different locations that are available there. So it's all of these things that I think are always already top of mind for employers. Trying to find new workers to come in and help with the productivity. That aging hardware, all of the arguments. It's pretty much like everything is in place to have that conversation. And then on the back end, as you saw, all the tools, all the expertise, all the help is there to make sure that you look like a rock star in front of your customer by proposing these types of solutions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. So we have no questions in the chat. So I believe we'll end the presentation here. A couple of takeaways, like Alex mentioned, like Russia mentioned. So this is a partnership, right? We work very closely with Microsoft. If you have any questions, if you need help, the number is on the screen. There's an email. Send us an email. We'll be able to help you out. We have some great programs for new and existing clients, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And on that note, thanks again for joining us. And a copy of the presentation along with the deck and most importantly, the links that Microsoft has shared will be shared with you in a follow-up email. So thank you very much for joining us today, and have yourselves a great day.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Sherweb, for having us.
Thank you, Omar.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.